Global ambitions and scaling your business up internationally is where we are going to unpack, and the panel will unpack challenges and opportunities of taking the business global, either from start or after you've established in one market and then considering going to other locations, whether there are cultural nuances that need to be considered, regulatory compliance, customs, different ways and means of doing things. We heard from our last panel how important it is to have a really well-defined ideal customer profile when expanding. You don't scale to international markets, was what one of them said. You expand and then you consider scaling based on the options of what you've learned once you're there. And this panel is going to do an awesome job in talking to their specific experience. Moderated by Carmen Sparrow. Carmen is an expert in international trade. The panel also features industry leaders, Dr. Mohammed Farhani, Audrey Mascarenas, and Dennis Schultz. Each of them have their own experiences that they will speak to as they do the introduction. Carmen, just to give you a bit more of a flavor of who she is, all of us, by the way, are on LinkedIn and would welcome connecting with you as an audience. Carmen is a seasoned professional, international trade and development with over a decade of experience, specifically internationally arena. She, as a trade commissioner for Global Affairs Canada, she regularly assists Canadian companies in expanding internationally by assessing organizational capacity, advising on market entry strategies, and connecting leaders of companies with local resources and potential international partners. Carmen's extensive international experience spans Latin America and Africa. Wonderful. Prior to joining Global Affairs Canada, she held senior level roles in Canadian-based NGOs focusing on water and women's economic empowerment. With that, Carmen, over to you.
Thanks very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I think that you can hear me and see me. I just want to, first of all, say a warm welcome to our panelists, Dr. Mohammed Farhani. He is the founder of Stepper Technologies, which was founded only in 2018 with a fantastic new nanofiltration membrane technology that he'll tell you a little bit more about. We also have Audrey Mascarenas, the president and CEO of Questor Technology. And Audrey has spent her career in the oil and gas sector and has spearheaded a number of technologies to reduce industrial flaring and utilize waste energy. She can tell you a little bit more about that. And we have Dennis Schultz, who's the Executive Director of Trade and Export Expansion for the Ministry of Jobs, Economy and Trade for the Government of Alberta. And he brings over a decade of senior management experience to enhance Alberta's international trade presence. So welcome to all of the speakers. Thanks very much for making the time to be here. The focus on scaling your business internationally, as Pete had spoke earlier about, is how we unpack the challenges and opportunities of going global. And what I'd like to do first is just for each of you to take about 3 to 5 minutes to share your opinion on the topic. Tell us a little bit about your business or what you do. And then from your experience, share your thinking on going global. What are some of the key messages that you want to impart to the audience? It could be around opportunities, challenges, insights, and we'll take about 3 to 5 minutes each. And I'm going to start with Dennis to give us that broad overview from a government perspective. Thanks, Dennis.
Yeah, great. Thanks a lot. And thanks for everyone being here today. We're really excited about this panel today of going global. It's something we're all very passionate about. Bringing the Alberta lens to the table. What we do here with the government of Alberta is we help Alberta export-ready companies export internationally. So last year, we've led 31 different international trade missions globally. So we have a team that covers the world. So we have 5 geographic areas that we look into, and I'll just start by saying each of the geographic areas and countries even within those geographical areas all do business a little bit differently. So I think the first point is knowing your audience and knowing who you're trying to expand into and connecting some of the dots and having some of the relations. We'll say doing a mission this year to Japan and doing a mission to the Middle East and doing one to Australia all have different areas of expertise and kind of emerging markets are different than kind of existing established markets. We'll just start with that. Our team also hosts incoming delegations as well. So for ambassadors and consul generals coming into Alberta, we also host them to partner them with the right types of Alberta. So Alberta companies kind of get the showcase that they need. We work with the federal government very closely when we do these trade missions overseas as well going forward. So some of the opportunities that we see in going global are definitely in the emerging markets. With high risk comes high reward. It's being ready and having the understanding of what lies ahead. On some of our trade missions, a good trade mission results in not doing business in those areas. Sometimes people come onto these companies come on these trade missions for 3, 4, 5 times and then start doing business. It's not a short venture. It's not a one and done experience. It's longevity in the market that kind of portrays success. We've seen it for our Alberta companies. Challenges is the geopolitical, like one day it's safe going into a country, the next it isn't as safe. So I think the geopolitical is always on our minds, and we're always following we're always following the federal government's recommendations going forward. So with that, I think that was my 3 minutes. I'll just pass it back to Carmen.
Great, thanks so much, Dennis. Really appreciate your opening comments on the opportunities and challenges. I'm going to turn it over now to Audrey to hear from Audrey, get her to tell us a little bit about herself and her company and all the great work she's been doing, and to get her insights on what it means for going global and what she's learned. Thanks, Audrey.
Thanks, Carmen. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I speak a lot through pictures, so I'm sharing a screen. So what Questor does is we have patented technology that allows us to take any waste gas stream, make sure it's cleanly combusted so we don't put harmful pollutants into the atmosphere, and then use that energy wisely. We've been around for over 25 years, and we have units globally. This just gives you a feel. We've worked in Indonesia. We've got units in Zor. It's just a few examples. Probably our first international venture was into the US. So you've got some pictures there. It expanded into Europe. And right now, when we look at the opportunity for our company, our Canadian market is small, but the opportunity to go global also gives us this opportunity to grow. We're focused on methane. The whole world is focusing on it. And we happen to have technology that is considered best in class globally around the world. And the market that we're trying to target, or the solution that we're trying to solve, is all of this waste gas that's flared and vented, waste energy has a big impact on air quality and is harmful emissions. So that also means it takes us to places like Nigeria, for example. So I'll share some comments as we get into the panel around that. And then finally, we're not a big company, we're a public company. But for us, our strategy as we go international is to find good partners that help us target these markets. So we interview them, we spend time with them, we get input from the trade commissioners and the Alberta trade folks on who we should partner with. And these areas that we've picked are areas that have some of the biggest problems around emissions, but they also have tough regulation that is going to push these countries to move. And that's what I wanted to share today. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Audrey, for the intro. And we will get into more because you're dealing in some interesting markets. And so we'll talk a little bit more in a minute. Next, we have Dr. Mohammed Farani from Sepper Technologies. Mohammed, if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about your company, because it's coming from a different perspective. It's not a startup anymore, but it's been, I think it was 2018 when it started. So tell us a little bit about your company and your journey so far. That would be fantastic.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure being here. My name is Mohammed Farahani. I'm founder and CEO of Sepure. So for me as a technical founder, when I started to, to start a company, I took my technology that I developed during my PhD in university to commercialize it. At that time, I was not thinking about like going global, but it happened gradually. So I will be sharing some of that experience with you today. But giving you some insight on what we are doing. So Sepure Technologies works on circular use of solvents in various industries, including food, pharmaceutical, semiconductor, and oil and gas. So all these industries use enormous amount of organic solvents like ethanol, methanol, acetone, these type of solvents. And what happens is either they dispose them after single use as a waste, and that gets incinerated, or if they are really good, they will distill them to purify them, which distillation requires a lot of energy from burning fossil fuels to evaporate that solvent and separate it and purify it. So we are replacing this by introducing a filter that has nanoscale pores and can selectively purify those solvents without that much energy that they need to use actually in distillation. So we reduce the energy consumption and emissions of that solvent recycling process by 90%. So it's a safe process, it's cheap process, and it helps saving over 16 billion liters of solvents annually. So initially, we started the company in Singapore because I did my PhD in National University of Singapore, where I got $10 million funding from Singapore government to develop the technology. Then eventually, we expanded into North America, but pretty quickly, we found ourselves in a global market, which I will explain later. So we have global customers across different regions. So I'll pause here, and then maybe in the questions, I will dig into the global scale-up part.
Great. Thank you so much, Mohammed. So I think we're going to start off kind of with the broad questions of understanding that global landscape, thinking about our audience, and we've probably got small to mid-sized companies. Some have exported, some have not. And, it's a big, wide world and wild world out there some days. So I wanted to think about what are some of the factors that a company needs to consider in deciding if and where to go internationally. So just kind of looking at that broad brushstroke. So Dennis, I'm going to start with you, and just from your experience in international trade, can you talk a little bit about how you perceive what that current global business landscape looks like, and what are the opportunities and challenges for businesses who maybe haven't gone yet internationally, and what they're looking to scale internationally, what they need to be thinking about?
Yeah, for sure. It's such an important question, and we meet with companies on a daily basis on our team to kind of make sure that they're at the right stage and they're at the right kind of part of their export journey. I think there's many parts of different programs such as TAP, the Trade Accelerator program, that is also put on by Edmonton Global and Calgary Economic Development. Making sure that you're at the right stage and you know who your customer who is and who the decision makers are in the organization. So I think that's a very important consideration in different countries, in different jurisdictions. It's different how you go about those journeys. So really making sure that you understand what that looks like. So going with the provincial government or federal government gives credibility in some cases. When an example would be some of the oil and gas is nationalized. So we would meet with some of the government agencies to have a door in for some of the Alberta companies that would be joining us. So that would be a way that the company would know that and they would come along. That doesn't work in all jurisdictions or all countries. So that would be an advantage. Just as far as the kind of the global context, I'll just kind of share some opportunities and challenges. I think emerging markets play a huge opportunity for Alberta companies. Some of our technologies and services that we see with our Alberta companies, they're at the forefront. It's the Canadian brand. especially through Asia, Africa, Latin America, India. Some of the things that we've been doing for 10 years are new technologies there for some of their industries. I know Audrey could probably speak to that in detail. I'll just kind of brush over the high strokes as well. Trade agreements, I think, is a huge opportunity in Canada. We have lots of different trade agreements, like understanding the markets you're going to and the trade agreements and all of the benefits that are associated with those. It really could put your business or your product or service in a different category. I also think with the technological advancements, there's reduced barriers to entry to some markets with digital platforms, with e-commerce, with the fintech solutions, enabling small business to reach worldwide markets. I think that's an opportunity going forward. Challenges, like, yeah, let's get into a couple of these. Regulatory compliance, cultural and nuances, supply chain disruptions, competitive landscape, to name a few, and we can dive into some of those. The cultural nuances is understanding and adapting to cultural differences in each of the different areas where you're looking at exporting. And then the supply chain disruptions, as we've seen through COVID, as we've seen time and time again, that you have to start thinking ahead and what that would look like for your business. It could cripple your business if you're not thinking about what that supply chain, what the border agents will do if there is a article of non-compliance, or just really thinking through your supply chain and all the little details. So those are a couple of the opportunities and challenges in the global landscape. I'm really curious to have a conversation with the other panelists on this topic too.
Great, thanks so much, Dennis.
Yeah.
We heard a few things, both on emerging markets and how in some cases Canada's technologies are ahead of the game. Maybe I'll go to Audrey around that, because Audrey, you've been in a number of countries now, and you're selling in a number of countries. How do geopolitical factors influence your business decision in terms of where you're going, and how do you, as you go into some of those places, you had mentioned Nigeria, how do you mitigate risks around geopolitical factors?
So always paying attention to geopolitical factors, and the challenge there is they change constantly. And I'll give you an example. We were looking at projects in Kurdistan and talking to numerous clients, and then of course the oil and gas got shut down because there was a disagreement between the Iraqi government and Kurdistan, and all of a sudden, you know, the opportunity dried up. But in addition, one of our clients there was Rosneft. So when Russia invaded Ukraine, all of a sudden for a public company, it became extremely complicated to do business, right? So you've got to stay up to date in terms of news. Always look and go, something can always happen unexpectedly. So you don't put all your eggs in one basket. So Questor's strategy has been to work with partners so that we can, because they're in country, they understand what's going on in the country, is to always be aware that that's going to happen. Think about what's driving the market opportunity for you in that country. And a lot of times, you know, we don't just rely on regulation. Nigeria's had regulation, for example, for a very long time to get rid of flaring and venting. I've been passionate about the opportunity for our technology there since 2005. And it's probably this year where all the pieces have fallen into place that we will get a chance to send a unit there. So you've got to be patient, bide your time, be very strategic, stay informed, and not put everything at risk. The other challenge that we haven't mentioned is, in addition, is making sure that you're going to get paid. So how do you set up your agreements and your contracts so you're not taking that risk? And even if you think you've got it done, you know, EDC becomes a great way to make sure if there's something unforeseen that you will get paid eventually as well.
Audrey, maybe just on that point, I think it's really important also to note knowing the risks before you're going into a market about the payment. A good example is Argentina right now. Hyperinflation, getting money out of the country is extremely difficult. But I think Alberta companies are seeing some success there. But you have to know of the risk level going into it. The risk sometimes isn't worth the reward, but sometimes it is for companies, and each company would need to make that assessment. So I think that's bang on.
You bet.
Audrey.
Thanks, Audrey. Thanks, Dennis, for bringing that up. Switching over to Mohammed, from your perspective, Mohammed, what do you see as, and for your technology, what do you see as the most promising regions or markets for international expansion? And from how do you look at the factors, and what factors contribute to those attractive markets?
Yeah, thank you very much. So I'll just maybe give some factors that are maybe useful for all sort of businesses, and I will just give a specific one about ourselves. So I think the first thing we should look is the economic growth. If the economic growth is there, we can actually look at the market demand. If for such product or service you're providing, there is a market demand, and whether the market can pay for that product. We like because different countries have different like affordability rates and stuff like that. Another thing would be the government policies, whether it's in support of your product or service, or they are basically prohibiting it, or they have nothing to do with it. And innovation ecosystems are pretty important, because if you go to a country that is less reluctant to change, technology-wise, it's much more difficult to bring in a new technology and try to sell to them. And the other part is regulatory environment, specifically when it comes to clean tech solutions. You want this seen to be in your favor, like with carbon taxes and other measurements in place. So what we are looking at is from the angle of the market demand, because we want to actually start with one market segment, which currently we are doing, and that's a vegetable oil industry, and very specifically on palm oil applications in the a specialty fat chocolate manufacturing. And we are helping those refineries. And what we did was through market research, and we found they are in certain locations. So they're either in Southeast Asia, in Malaysia and Singapore, or in the Netherlands. And that's very interesting, because it's so specific, the locations that they're operating. It's either because of the demand of those products that's going there, or because of the production of the palm oil in that region. So for other industries, actually, we are having other things in mind. Like if you want to go to semicon or pharma and other industries, like Indo-Pacific in general has the growth potential. The market size is big. There is a government support at the moment for new technologies in clean tech. In North America, it's established market, so you wouldn't see a lot of surprises. So there is an innovation hub, aspects of it, and then the regulatory environment is already established. In Europe, there is a sustainability focus, so it's pretty interesting for clean tech solutions like us to focus on that market. The funding and incentives from government and from the euro itself is pretty useful, and the market acceptance of the new products and technologies is there. So in the Middle East is different, so it's investment in innovation is just getting started. They have willingness for diversification from oil and gas, and then there is a strategic location for certain technologies. So I think like having all this, factors, I think we can come to a conclusion after a really good market research, where should we go for each of these technologies.
Wow, thanks, Mohammed. That was a great list. And you had brought up a couple of things, not just government regulation, but government incentives in some countries that are looking for emerging technologies that Canada may have, that country is looking for. That's really important. And I think another one that you mentioned, sometimes in terms of technologies, but just in terms of that market acceptance. So what might be already a market in Canada may not be a market somewhere else. And so as a company, you have to kind of decide on the risk reward piece that Dennis had mentioned, you know, on one hand, you can go in and be a first in and have that first in advantage. But sometimes if you go first in and the market's not there, then it makes it a little more difficult. So it's reading that emerging market well, I think is key. I really appreciate the comments that all of you have made around this topic in terms of looking at that global landscape, country risk profile, cultural and regulatory environments. I think for myself and what I've seen from our clients, the other piece I think to think about is, you know, from your own business, what's your own risk profile? What's your own priorities? You know, it's, you know, a lot of companies go into the USA at first because it's culturally similar. The regulations are there, but there's also a lot more competition. And so, you know, sometimes that's not necessarily profitable versus going into an emerging market where it is higher risk and higher reward. So just thinking about your own risk profile and also where you have some context and connection. I think to Mohammed's point, doing that market research, but also having making the time to make connections in those markets. And to Dennis's point, taking the time to explore them, whether it's through a outgoing or an incoming trade mission, helps to kind of figure out what your comfort level is with each of the markets. So thank you very much on that question. We're going to turn, I'm actually going to talk about, because we talked a little bit about, you each had touched on regulations a bit. So let's talk about that. Let's dive a little further into that one. And looking at kind of both the regulations, the compliance and the environment and the opportunities. So I'll start with you again, Dennis. From your experience, what are some common kind of regulatory hurdles that businesses face when they're expanding internationally, and how do they kind of address them?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think managing regulatory compliance is a critical aspect of successful international expansion. Some strategies that you can, of course, and understanding the local regulations is the number one. You need to, before entering a new market, conduct comprehensive research to understand the regulatory environment. Includes specific regulations, labor laws, environmental standards, tax obligations, repatriating your money, utilizing resources, like some strategies, government websites, industry reports, and local legal experts. Every time you come on a mission with the government of Alberta, we'll meet with the local legal team to kind of set the stage to make sure you know exactly kind of what you're getting into before you start meeting with companies, getting into different types of agreements with different local representatives, as Audrey was referring to, like really interviewing and making sure you're getting the right partners and really understanding local regulations at the same time. We see companies engaging local expertise, so hiring consultants, hiring strategic partnerships, joint ventures. There's a lot of different ways to do business throughout the world, but just understanding, kind of to Audrey's point, your risk tolerance when you're assessing the local regulations and regulatory landscape. We see also companies now are starting to leverage different types of technologies as well in market to kind of assist on some of the local regulations. And I only think that'll start getting expanded as AI kind of can assist on some of that as well, making sure your specific industry and your local regulatory framework. I think North America is going to lead that charge that we're seeing, but I think other countries will follow.
Great, thanks, Dennis.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, there's a lot of good things to think about in terms of regulation and from and you were talking kind of along the compliance and the due diligence line of thinking. I'm going to switch over to Audrey because I think in Audrey, perhaps you can talk a little bit about regulatory environment and how do you navigate opportunities and challenges in regulation when you're expanding into new markets? And I'm thinking specifically about the emissions and methane piece and what you've seen there.
Okay, so you just opened up a big can of worms. So I mean, regulation's complicated, right? And it's complicated globally. A lot of times regulation's part of what drives our interest in a market, but what we've also come to learn, and especially in this emission space, is there's a lot of times companies looking at loopholes, and I'll pick on Nigeria, right? They've had a regulation and wanted change for a very long time. But if it doesn't get enforced, companies actually don't do anything, right? So you could have all the best regulation in the world, and if it isn't enforced, companies will look for loopholes. So we'll look at regulation just as one part of it. We spend a lot of time focusing on what is our client's pain point that is going to push them for action specific to what we do. And I'll illustrate an example here. We happen to be presenting to Total in Libya, and the crude there is quite waxy. Now, there is a global focus on getting rid of flaring and venting, but as I was doing the presentation and talking about how our enclosed system allows them to use the heat wisely, they said, wait a minute, Audrey, stop. And they say, are you telling us that you could take the heat from this gas that we're wasting and we could use it to heat up our oil instead of burning 10% of our oil production to do the same thing? And I said, yes. Well, that changed the entire conversation. Now, our conversation started initially with we want to get rid of flaring and venting, but all of a sudden we got to a business case. So when we start to evaluate and look at the market, it's what is going to drive our clients to us? What do we offer them that others can't? And what economic benefit does it leave for them? So we're always focusing on what will bring clients to us. Why can we be successful? And regulation's a part of it, but it's not a big part of it.
Great. Thanks, Audrey. It's a really good point, because I think we see regulations upcoming, and I think in some areas we feel like Canada is a leader in regulatory development. But to your point, what's written on paper isn't, if it's not enforced, then it's not going to matter. Right. So it's what is we always say the map is not the territory sometimes. So. Mm-hmm. Mohammed, from your point of view, particularly because in your case, you're dealing in some industries like pharmaceuticals, like food and beverage, what, from your point of view, how have regulations impacted you in terms of trying to go global?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I think in certain cases, we have to actually accept the fact that we need some, certifications to go to certain markets, because without that, there is no chance of success. For example, for food application or pharmaceutical application, we had to obtain food safe compliance certifications, and we have chosen Euro standard because it was, the most accepted, standard even in regions other than Europe. So that was basically a way to go. So we couldn't really not doing it. We did that part already, but there are other things that we are considering in certain geographies. For example, we have chosen to have a flexible business model. So, and the way that we enter the market, I give you an example. We can actually use our technology for semiconductor solvent recycling and for pharmaceutical solvent recycling. So we can either go and approach the end user, let's say GSK, Pfizer, and all those pharma companies, and tell them, okay, you can recycle your solvent using our technology and reuse it. But each of these companies or geographies they're operating, they may have certain standard that this solvent, if it's in the process of pharmaceutical, should come from these sources. So instead of not gaining any success with a discussion that goes nowhere, we can actually go to waste collectors who collects the solvent waste from these guys, which is a everyday job for them to go and collect the waste. And what they do today is just burn the waste solvent, and the Pfizer and all other people, they have to go and buy fresh solvents from those sources every day. So we go to these waste collectors and saying that, can you just use our technology to recycle the solvent instead of burning it? And now you have a product that you can sell it either to the same market after getting the certificate of analysis of this product, if the quality meets that regulations, or you can actually sell it to another industry that has lower requirements, but still a lot of value that can be captured from that waste solvent. They couldn't do it before, so we unlock that. Another part is in certain location, if you want to operate, you have to know that you need a local partner, specifically China. If you want to sell in Chinese market and you are a complete foreign company without having a local partner, the chance of success is extremely low. We have seen Uber case, we've seen other, similar to Uber cases that they got copied and then they send them out of the country with a lot of loss. So you have to actually choose the right partner to work with. Sometimes for certain technology, it might be government or just the private sector. And sometimes you have to actually get into a joint venture that you don't own the majority in order to have that market access in certain locations. So yeah, it comes with these things. But one of the things I want to mention here, because I think Dennis mentioned about consultant and local experts, that's really important to get access to those for early, research of any market. But a lot of times for early stage of startups, they cannot afford to hire such expensive, services. What they can do and what is, I think, very beneficial is using trade commission service, because trade commissioners in different locations, they are almost experts in those fields that they're working in. They are in that role for 20, 30 years sometimes, and they know everyone in that market, and they probably can be your free consultant to begin with. They have a lot of market intelligence that you can use at the very early stage of the company before you want to decide whether you want to go to that market or not.
Oh, thanks for the plug, Mohammed. I really appreciate that. And thank you for bringing up a couple of interesting points. And I think it will transition us into the next question. But both you and Audrey had talked about kind of going in the market, looking at a market entry strategy or a technology or product application in one way, and then while in the market, figuring out that's not quite the right fit and pivoting to a different way to apply the technology, or a different, to Audrey's point, a pain point or a value add to a local customer. So I'm going to switch over a little more to kind of strategic direction and international expansion strategies, and thinking about, we've talked about kind of where should we go and what to look at when we're deciding where to go. But when we're getting to the point of identifying that particular market, and starting to talk about how we're going into that market, I think is we could spend a few minutes on that. So I'm going to switch back to Dennis and just ask you from an overall perspective, when companies are developing their international expansion strategies, what factors should they consider in terms of market entry modes? So how to enter a particular market, and how might that impact the short term and the long term?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. So we sit down, I think every company is unique of the resources that they bring to the table as well, and where they're at in their export journey. I think that's a really important kind of asterisk qualification to understand where your company is, and then matching up the right resources that the governments can provide. I think an interesting, we have 13 international or 18 international offices now throughout the world for the Alberta government. So some of the same resources that Mohammed was referencing. really understanding how the Alberta government and how the Trade Commissioner Service can be your first point of contact to navigate each of those interesting but very different markets. Having good mentors around you as well, I think, is another really important. We find lots of the camaraderie of Alberta companies joining a trade mission. They end up doing a lot of business with themselves, or they share success stories, or they share kind of challenges of entering those markets. So I think for the market entry plan of what markets you're going to be choosing is depending on your risk level, depending on your resources, are the two things that kind of stand out for me right now.
Yeah, I think those are really important points in terms
Mhm.
of looking at yourself and what capacity you have. I know, Audrey, you had touched on strategic alliances and partnerships earlier. Could you elaborate on that and how you have identified and kind of leveraged alliances and partnerships as you've gone international?
Yeah, so I guess when we looked at our strategy for growing, for the size of company and how complex many of these regions are, first we started and looked at, where are the regions that we think we've got a probability of success, whether it's regulation or clients, right? And in our case, we picked Latin America, and it was partly because I went on a trade mission with Dennis to Ecuador and Argentina, right? It was a chance to go and meet with clients and evaluate and really make sure there was a business case to go there. The other is India right now, Middle East, and Africa, right? So we picked those. And why did we pick those? They're countries that have some of the biggest flaring problems. And so then the next step was to evaluate, can we be successful in these markets on our own? And because of our size, looked at all of those markets saying we need to have partners that are strong in those places. Now, we were lucky because some of the partners came and found us. So for example, Horbiger went to Colorado because they've got some of the toughest rules in the world. And they asked around and said, who is the company that really knows what they're doing and solves the problem of emissions? And Horbiger found us. So we picked them in Latin America as our partner. In Africa, and of course, Nigeria was complicated. I've been approached over the years by many, many people, but it turned out the partner that we chose was someone that was working for one of our clients, had worked for Schlumberger, et cetera. So we've got a great partner in Nigeria that I can trust. So half of it is also who can you trust? Our sense was, why would we try and reinvent the wheel for a company our size? Let's interview and go find those companies who have a track record. So in India, now first High-Tech came and found us. But then as we did the research, they've got a 35-year track record bringing other technologies into India. So they're representing some big companies like Pole Filtration. And so we feel that we're in good hands. And in a very short time in India, we've made a lot of inroads, and we've actually been selected by the refinery company to be their sole provider, which is unheard of in India, right? So there's lots of opportunities if you've got good partners, and the emphasis here is finding good partners, because you could just as easily find bad ones and ruin your reputation.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And taking the time to do that due diligence and building relationships with the partner to be able to assess, because I think in country, they represent you, they're doing dealings for you, and it's a big deal. So taking that time, I think, is super important. Mohammed, from your perspective, because you're in a bit of a unique position in the sense that your technology has application across a variety of sectors, as you had mentioned earlier: agriculture, pharmaceutical, chemical, semiconductors. What market entry approaches are looking at multiple sectors across multiple territories? How have you kind of prioritized within that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I will start with what was really important was basically focused market segmentation. So identifying our high potential segment at the beginning or high volume, depends on how you look at it. In case of like sales and the low hanging fruit that you can actually just enter the market. And we identified that to be vegetable oil industry. And then eventually we decided to expand to the other verticals. But for vegetable oil, we dig into and we found like which application is going to be our first one. And we found that like it's palm oil and acetone separation. That is for a specialty fat. So they need to reduce their emissions, they're under pressure, they need to reduce the cost of the process. Their margins are pretty small, like 2% margin. And if we can double their margin to just 4%, they're gonna be really, really happy. And the volume is big. So we identified that, we found the locations that these companies are operating. And then we are working with like big names, like the majority of the global leaders in the vegetable oil, and they have other vegetable oil plants in other fields. So once we unlock this, then it automatically goes to the other fields. So that was the concept. When we were looking at another market like semiconductor, we started to look geographically. So we said where the semiconductor products are coming from. And it turns out that 70% of that is coming from Taiwan. So, and what we did was tapping on the resources like Alberta office in Taiwan and the Trade Commissioner Service in Taiwan. They actually put together a full week of kind of boutique mission for our company that we went there, spent a week there, and we had like meetings even during lunch and dinner. So we managed to meet like almost all the main players in the semiconductor industry. We already put together a Eureka grant with them that we are getting. So we found partners to enter that market. And our approach there was you need to have a partner that understands semiconductor, because semiconductor is a very secretive industry. You cannot just learn it by reading articles. You need someone from the industry to tell you what exactly they want and how they want it. And that's why we wanted to have a partner and enter with them, to the market. So partnership is important in industry-specific strategies, as I mentioned, location-wise, and also demonstrating proven result is another big factor. For example, when we are working with the number one company in the world or number 2 or 3, if we obtain some results from our testing, so it's just as easy as sharing that result, not in detail, but overall with the other players in that market. And that's a quick sell. So they all want it because they don't want to be behind the game. And what didn't work for us was, like, as a small company, resource allocation challenges. So we cannot really look into everything. So we cannot look into pharma at the same time, semicon at the same time, to vegetable oil. We had to actually pick which vertical we want to go and go deep in that, kind of get 70%, 80% of the market share, and then decide on the next vertical. And another one was initially we were thinking one size fits all, but it turns out that it doesn't work. So we had to actually change our business model, learn about our customers holistically to kind of tailor the solution we are providing to them. In certain industries with low volume, we are leasing the equipment to them as a service, so they don't pay anything upfront, but they start making money from day one. In other industries that are like quite big investment at the beginning, so they are open to buy the equipment and buy the membranes from us. So we have to actually kind of tailor this for different applications and industries.
Well, thank you for that response. You've brought up a lot of good points in terms of knowing how many resources you have to go global and being able to prioritize, I think, is key. I often meet with companies, and sometimes it's like we ask them a bunch of questions like, well, where do you want to, what are you looking at in terms of markets? Oh, we could go anywhere. And I'm like, well, you could, but I don't think you have the capacity to go everywhere all at once. So thinking about that piece, I think, is really good. And it's interesting to hear, like, depending on the market and the application, you know, sometimes you can go direct to the big players, like to the big companies in those countries, but sometimes you do need a local partner to help you navigate that. And I think that's where the Alberta office can help, where the Trade Commissioner Service can help kind of, you know, test those theories with you. The other thing I've noticed about in Canadian companies, I mean, we work a lot with small and mid-sized companies, and there's some great Canadian technologies and some great engineering. And I think where we can work on is around, I think for some companies, they often want to do what I call sell and ship. Like, they've got this product or service and they just want to take it, sell it, and be done. Whereas I think as you go more and more into emerging markets, the relationship and the sales cycle is longer. You're meeting with local partners. It's not as, there's often training involved. There's often helping develop some pieces of the market. Sometimes the regulation isn't there. So there's a lot more, I would say, complex relationships going on than a simple sell and ship kind of model for exporting. So that's just something to think about. And obviously it depends on the market and the product or service, but just those are some of the things to think about. We have about 6 minutes left here. So I'm going to stray from some of the themes that we had, but there's a couple of questions in the chat. And one of them was a question for Audrey, to put you on the spot, and you can leverage us as well. Or Audrey touched on know how and if you're going to get paid, and local channel partners can help. But what are kind of practical rules of thumb? For example, expect to rarely collect 10% holdback until the project is completed. You know, have you had some rules of thumb to kind of think through on that potential payback or not payback?
You bet. So, and sometimes if I'm looking at a country that I'm not sure, I'll look to have most of it paid before it gets on a boat and moves, right? So making sure that you've got the cash in hand. Oftentimes there will be a 10% holdback. So making sure that there is absolute clarity on what you have to do to release that final 10%. A lot of times you'll see it left quite vague, and in some ways a lot of your international clients may treat it as a 10% discount. So being really careful and making sure you're both in agreement on the things you have to do that then, and how you sign off to get that final 10% release. We spend a lot of time thinking about how we negotiate and put the deals together to really make sure that we get paid. And like I said, if we feel that there is a risk, making sure that we've got payment up front. And always making sure when you sign that agreement, there's absolute clarity on the scope of work for each of you, and who's going to deliver what, and what are the things you need to do around the milestones to get paid. So I hope that answers the question. Yeah, and then finally, if you're not sure, get EDC insurance, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, EDC does have accounts receivable insurance, and they do have other types of insurance as people go through the bid process as well, bid bonds and things like that. So Mohammed or Dennis, did you want to add anything on that piece about getting paid?
I can quickly jump in. So one of the things we have currently is, like, as a small company, the cash flow component is really important. So in projects that is even like $1 million, we cannot just have that expenses upfront and not get paid or not get a big portion of that upfront. So we managed to negotiate, even though the companies are like trustworthy in locations that we are sure that they're gonna pay us, we had to actually negotiate favorable terms to us of like 80% or 70% down payments. So which we get like almost everything we're spending on the project upfront, and we leave the margin for future.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I think that's very good words of advice for companies. We have one other last question here that's coming up, and it was around intellectual property protection, which is something we haven't talked about today, and looking at that from an international perspective. So the question was, how big a circle do you draw at the beginning, considering foreign market potential, when you're drawing your IP fence, so to speak? And I'm just going to open that up to the speakers. Feel free to jump in.
So I can jump in first. As we work globally, never rely on our IP to protect our technology. It's nice to have, we're a public company, shareholders value that part, but you end up in a very complicated world if you're relying on protecting it. So you've got to draw other or create other moats around your technology that protect you. IP certainly doesn't, because as a small company, you're not going to spend years in court trying to sue a partner in the other end. So if you are concerned that your IP will be breached, look at other ways that you can kind of protect it. But my advice would be not to rely on your patents to say that you've got to protect it.